A very good afternoon to one and all. At the outset, I bring you greetings from this beautiful looking institute of mine, Chess Research Foundation, based at Pune. And a very happy international clinical trials day to all my friends from industry and academia all across India. Today we are going to discuss on a very important topic, which is about engaging the patients in clinical trial. And I personally feel that this is a very important topic because if there are no patients, there can be no clinical trials done. So let's move on to today's further presentation. What is the role of patient in clinical research? Well, the patient is the heart and soul of clinical research or clinical trial, or for that matter, any medical research project. Patients are the reason why clinical research was born, why this field is into existence today. Patients are the reason why clinical research is needed, why advancement in medical techniques and treatments are needed. And patients are the reason for whom clinical trials or clinical research is conducted. I would like to draw your attention to a very important fact that medical research is a search for cure of illness and diseases for the benefit of patients. So at the end of the day, whatever is being done for the benefit of mankind, for the benefit of the patients, millions of patients across the world who are suffering from these diseases. And clinical research is no rocket science. It's a kind of medical research which looks into the systematic investigation into better ways to diagnose, understand, prevent, and treat a disease. Now let's have a sneak peek into a few facts. As all of us know that patient recruitment and retention is the key to success of any clinical trial across the world. And more important is not just enrolling the patient, but retaining these enrolled patients into the clinical trial right till the last patient last visit. And this is where the successful clinical trials play a role above the unsuccessful ones or the not so successful ones. So you really have to recruit and retain your patients till the end. And between this recruitment and retention is a whole journey which a patient takes through the life of that clinical trial in which he has participated. Now, I just looked into the CTRI website this morning, and the current number of clinical trials registered in the system are 6,949 till date. This is of course the data for the last many years since CTRI is into existence. But what is interesting to note is that there's a lot of methodically studied data that less than 10% of the clinical trials are completed on time. And so we were on a very important question that why many of the clinical trials cannot really complete the targeted recruitment. So less than 10% of the clinical trials are completed on time, and recruitment and retention failed is of the top 10 reasons why clinical trials are delayed and are not completed on time. Estimated 20% of PIs fail to enroll a single patient, and 30% of them fail to reach the enrollment targets. Now this is isn't it a little ironic given the fact that India is a country with diverse ethnic population. We are such a huge population, so many diseases existing, and so many patients, millions and millions of patients suffering from these diseases. So what really affects and why are the doctors or the investigators unable to recruit patients into this study? I'll come back to that a little later. Let us first look into the good things. Why patients participate in clinical trial? Well, if you go on and just check onto the internet, there are a lot of studies which have been done which look into various reasons why patients participate in clinical trial. But there is a huge paucity of data reported from India. There are hardly 1 or 2 studies which have been done in very specific geographies, and my personal opinion is that the study design hasn't looked into many other aspects which should have been done. And therefore, I would take out this data with a little pinch of salt. So having said that, trying to understand why patients participate in clinical research, these are the reasons based on literature, and these are the reasons based on the experiences we have had for the past 10 years of recruiting into clinical trials. First and foremost, there's a good group of patients who want to help advance the medical knowledge, not for them, but for the next generations to come. Access to promising new treatments or procedures, many a times, especially in critical illness clinical trials like cancer, HIV, AIDS, when medical science comes to a roadblock, when there is nothing much one can really do for the patient, then clinical trials or the new drugs in pipeline, the new promising therapies in pipeline become a ray of hope for the patients who enroll into these clinical trials. Recommendation by trusted source. This is indeed a very important point because we have been receiving many patients who are recommended by either by another patient who has previously taken part in clinical trial or by some doctor who has visited the place, looked into the systems and understood the science of conducting clinical trials. Trust in the treating or referring doctor. This is again one of the common reasons why clinical trials participants take part, because they have faith in their doctor that the doctor is going to do all good for them. Positive experience from previous study participation. This is again one of the, should be one of the most commonest reasons why patients participate, because once they participate, once they get used to the kind of medical attention, priority which they get in the clinical trials, they definitely look forward to the next one. Easy access to specialized and priority healthcare attention. Now this is indeed a very important point because in India, given the patient load, in any given OPD which you may visit anytime, patients really have to go away their turn, take off from work, take half a day off, go to the doctor, sit in the long queues and await their turn despite taking appointments because the load is huge. Each doctor is catering to 50, 100 patients in 4-hour span. And therefore, when a person participates in a clinical trial and is given priority over every other patient sitting in the queue, I think that is a sort of feeling or a sort of treatment which they get, which is definitely addictive, and they would definitely like to participate in further studies if there is no major risk to their health. Screening procedures and tests which otherwise would not have been done. We have come across many patients who usually participate once a year in one of our trials. The reason being they want to get their checkups done, they want to get their blood workup done, which usually they'll have to either take time out or spend separately. So that is again one reason why patients participate. And financial benefits, definitely. The insurance, the compensations, the payment for loss of daily wages. These are also the reasons which have been cited in literature why patients participate, though most of them refer it to be in addition to some other reason. So this perhaps is not the main reason why any patient participates. Despite so many positive reasons to participate in a clinical trial, why is it that still recruitment remains a big challenge in clinical trials? Why do patients not participate? Why do we investigators still not have, line of patients who would like to participate in a certain clinical trial? Though I think each one of us, if I'm specialized in asthma and COPD, I see around 50 patients a day. Why is it that it takes me so long to recruit, a month's time to recruit 10 patients or 5 patients in a study? Well, the answer to this is complex, and I would like to divide this answer into 2 categories. There's one category of patient, which is research naive population, who has never participated in research, who has never known what research is. And there's another category of patient who has been sensitized in some or other way about research participation, either by taking part in a research study in a medical college or by participating in a clinical trial previously, or one of their relatives have participated in the trials earlier. So the first and foremost reason for a research naive population, see, you have to understand that for us as doctors, industry does all the bit required to ensure patient safety, minimization of risk. Law and ethics committee do their bit by ensuring patients' right and safety are taken care of. and the investigator or the doctor is then left on the forefront to do the most difficult task, which is recruiting human subjects into clinical trial. So the discussion starts with what is clinical research. When you talk to a research naive person, when you talk to a person who has no idea about research, to explain him how research is different from the regular treatment I can offer to them, what is clinical research, why is it beneficial for somebody to participate, it takes huge time, it takes a lot of convincing power, and it takes a lot of patience to make him understand what is right, what is wrong, how he is going to be benefited or how his health is going to be risked by participating in this particular study. So by far, we investigators believe that the lack of knowledge in common man, in Indian population, is the biggest hurdle towards recruiting patients in clinical trials or research in India. When you go to the West, I spent some time of my training at US, in University of Wisconsin, University of Hopkins. The experience over there was totally different than what we have in India. There, you just have to put up a notice board, you just have to put the message about an ongoing study on the social media, and you have patients ringing up to ask what the study is about. You know, doctor, how long is it going to take? So they are so well informed about the rights and safety, the rights of a patient in a clinical trial, what happens to a patient in a clinical trial, how these studies are conducted. There are so many questions to be faced that they actually appoint a patient coordinator to be informing about all these things. And then patients make a choice from the available list of clinical trials going on, and then they come and have the one-on-one informed consent process. So the major barrier to recruitment in India, in my opinion, is the lack of knowledge in common man, in patients. The next one being the risk. The overall perception of clinical research being a very risky affair. If you talk to a common man, little do you inform him that this is a kind of research. Oh, it's an experiment. I just don't want to risk my life. I don't want to be a guinea pig. So this perception, which is driven by a lot of negative publicity caused in, mainly through media. And of course, there are some bad examples, but I think in the large interest of society, large interest of medicine and research, we must look at a lot of good examples which are present and take some right take-home messages from them. So the overall negative perception created is also a very big barrier why clinical trials why it is very difficult to get participants for clinical trials. Time commitment. Now, today is an era where everyone is stressed. Everyone is stressed about jobs, about life, about time is money. No one has a little extra time to spend on anything. And in such an era, when you ask people to be coming to a medical facility repeatedly over a period of time, and there are studies, phase 2, phase 3 studies which happen for 1 year, 1.5 years, and you have to take a monthly or a 15 days commitment from a patient. How much ever we struggle at our end, make sure and that again becomes a big recruitment challenge to recruit the working lot. So there are so many. So for example, if I do an asthma study, there are so many patients. There are 2,000 patients registered in my database. But when I call them and when I inform them that, look here, you have to come once in every 15 days for a day to me, that becomes a concern for any patient to take a decision on whether they should participate or not participate. Options. Standard of care is very, very readily available in India at a very affordable cost. So think of a situation where you suffer, say, from headache. You go and visit your doctor, and your doctor gives you two choices. You can buy a particular medication, or you can take part in a clinical trial which is looking at a very wonderful medication for headache. Obviously, the choice becomes, oh, no. I have a good access to healthcare. I can pay, I can afford, so I really don't want to take part in research to be benefited. So again, options, good options become a hurdle. Wrong influence and guidance. So lack of knowledge on On the part of the family physician and clinician, sadly, those who, many a time it happens that a patient comes to us, we initiate a dialogue with them. They seem to be convinced and want to go back and discuss about these studies with their family doctors, with their relatives who are into medical fields, into MRs and selling medications and stuff. Unfortunately, many a times a big hurdle comes from that end, where they are primed in a very negative manner about participation into the study. And I said, oh, no, don't even think about it, it's risky. I have myself, during conducting clinical trials, have come across many times cases where an A happened which had to do nothing with the study medication. In fact, even the IPIC was not started. The patient goes to his family doctor and he develops a urticaria, overall allergy. And the doctor just says, see, you participated in the study and this is the result. So just back off, just don't take part in these studies. These are all, pharma gimmicks, don't take part. And the patients come back and withdraw their consent, and there's nothing we can really do to convince them or to make them understand that this is not the IP or not the study participation which is causing this particular ailment. Therefore, it is extremely essential that we take up some task to educate our fellow doctors in the fraternity about clinical trials and how every clinical trial is not a bad deed. Again, the next one, Dr. Google. By Dr. Google, Google by far is the best possible advancement in technology for a common man. But yes, there are a lot of special patients who are Google patients, because before they come and before discuss their clinical problems, leave aside clinical trials, they've already read a whole lot of things on the internet, and unfortunately more wrong things than the good things. And then it becomes extremely difficult to convince these patients about some line of therapy. So clinical trial is a very far-sighted thing for them. So you can't really discuss out with these patients. Even if you discuss, I think the overall acceptance of the patient is very low. Now we come to the next category of patients, the patients who have previously participated in clinical trials. Why does an investigator face a challenge to recruit these patients into a particular study? New drugs or procedures involving risks beyond the minimalistic ones. So if I call up a patient and I tell him, we have a new clinical trial and the known side effects of the medication are headache, GI upset, and some nominal stuff, they are very happy to come over and then have ICF process and understand what the study is about. But the moment you tell them, look here, there are a few deaths reported in the previous phase of the study, or the animal studies are suggestive of a minimal liver toxicity or something, I think that's the time even the previous experienced trial participants would back off, because end of the day, everybody gives the highest concern and highest priority to his own health. Chances of being on no treatment, placebo trials. Placebo trials again become a difficult task for us investigators as far as recruitment is concerned. The reason being, the moment you inform them that there's a brilliant drug, there's a wonderful drug which has been giving wonderful effects to treat your disease ailment. However, the design is such that there are 50% chances or 33% chances that you may go into this arm of this wonderful drug. You may go into treatment arm where you're getting the standard of care drug, or you may go into a third arm where you may just not receive anything and you will be on some SOS rescue medications. That becomes a major deterrent to participation, because end of the day, a lot of patients would like to participate to get some new treatment, so get an access to treatment which is otherwise not available to the patients all around. And then it becomes a challenge to recruit these kind of patients into studies. The offered treatment being lower than standard of care and the risk of worsening. So there are many studies wherein we look into non-inferiority, and the designs are such that fortunately or unfortunately we have to stop the ongoing standard of care medications of the patient and then enroll these patients into the study. There's a washout, run-in period for a time, and then again the study medication is provided. Now, once you tell them that this is a risk that during this washout period or during this run-in period, you may land up with worsening of your existing disease, patients take it with a pinch of salt, and they would like to know if there are some better studies going on. Complex protocol demanding long durations of commitment. Over and all, we are now getting a lot of studies, phase 2, phase 3, wherein the protocols are becoming more and more complex. There are a lot of blood withdrawals. There are a lot of visit procedures to be done. And these kind of studies, again, are not taken up very well by the previous research participants, and they think a lot before participating. Invasive procedures, frequent blood withdrawal are always a put-off. Audio-video consent procedure. Now, this is something we've been talking about for the last many months now. The DCGI has been kind enough to clear the air around the AV consenting and now restricting it only to the vulnerable population. However, this was seen as a major deterrent to participation by many of our patients, and the same kind of experiences have been shared by investigators all across. In fact, we did a study in investigators, 75 investigators all across India, and the results have very recently been published in PICR journal. So the overall perception of patients towards this audio-video consenting procedures, the main concern they have is, doctor, you've not done this ever. What's wrong with this study that you want to record my consent? Am I going to die? Is there a major risk involved which you're not telling me about? Females have a huge risk. They just don't want to be recorded. They have, and then third part is, when you record something, are you going to give a copy to them? If you're going to give a copy to them, the guidelines are were not very clear at that point in time. Could that be misused by some other person to cause some harm either to the investigator or to the patient? So there were so many issues around this AV consent, and therefore this was a major reason why a lot of patients used to drop out from clinical trials. And this is a reason which has been recently being asked by a lot of patients, that the medicine or drug will not be available after the study. We have had studies where patients have really benefited tremendously by participating in the study because the molecule was really promising. Now the question which we face as investigators is, once the study is finished, the study last visit is done, or the last visit for the patient is done, we just don't have that quality of care to be offered. We have to go back to whatever available in the market, whatever is available for us to prescribe. And that, with time, some really learned and smart patients have realized that there's no point participating in a clinical trial if that wonderful drug will not be available to me after the study. So it is not going to come in India. So we do have patients in India now who come and ask you whether this is going to be available in India, and that is taken as a consideration whether to participate or not. So these were the few points which I thought were essential to discuss, which hampers the recruitment of participants or the decision by the participants to participate in a particular research study or a clinical trial. So having understood this scenario, what is the need of the hour? In my opinion, the need of the hour is, tremendous need of the hour is awareness. Print and electronic media really need to pitch in to educate the common masses about clinical trials in the right sense. There are risks and there are benefits. So both be conveyed to the common man in a correct manner, in a scientific manner. Government should take initiatives to put up information on website where common man can just log on. They can understand what are the clinical trials going on in their particular area. They can read more about clinical trials, how they can benefit by participating, what are the risks if they participate, where can they go if in case they are in doubt, where can they go when they have some complaints. So these things really need to be put up centrally. Public and social media campaigns are essential, which I request all of my industry friends who are present today in this session, that in our own bit way, in our own, whatever outreach we have to the patients, in whatever manner we can, I think all of us should now start taking up public media campaigns, the social media campaigns, where we can inform the patients about their rights into participating in a study, how it benefits the mankind, what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of participating in a clinical study. Because end of the day, medical research and advancements are essential for patients' benefit. Think of a day when a patient, I'm sure people, the doctors treating cancer, HIV and all those terminal illnesses come across this situation every day in their life. That the patient is dying, but there's nothing more you can offer to the patient. There's nothing more you can really do to the patient. And I think as a doctor, that is a worst of situation to be in. And therefore, we realize the importance of advancement in medical research. And all of you have to join hands and making the common man in India really aware about what clinical research is about, what medical research is about, and how can they contribute to it. Now, from a patient's perspective, what is the clinical trial process? Whatever I'm discussing today is from a patient's perspective, because industry is educated enough, they rather know more about this process than us. So when I come across my patients whom I have to make understand what is a clinical trial, what is the process about, the first thing I tell them is a clinical trial or a clinical research project is a prospectively planned experiment. Yes, it is an experiment for the purpose of evaluating the potential benefit of a drug. But what is very important is that all these experiments or all these studies are conducted under as many controlled conditions as possible, so that they provide definitive answers to predetermined or well-defined questions, which means that we are trying to look into whether a particular treatment is really helpful to you, and if it is, are there any risks which are associated. And while all this is happening, safety and efficacy of the drug is being evaluated. While all this is happening, there are a host of organizations or a host of bodies which stringently monitor this entire process and have a single aim of protecting the right and safety of you, the clinical trial participant. So what is important for us to make them understand is a pharma company can just not go and file an application to market a product. There is a very systematic process in place. So if a pharma company comes up with a particular new drug or a new molecule, then they first test it out in the labs, they first test it out in the animals, and if the product is found to be safe enough in animals, then they go to the next stage of human testings. And by and large, these human testings or clinical trials are divided into 3 phases, 4 phases rather. So phase 1, 2, and 3 is the pre-marketing phase, and phase 4 is the collection of data after the marketing license has been approved. While all this is being done, it is extremely important for a patient to understand that the law of the land or the regulations of the land or Schedule Y and ethics committee, which has been formed to take care of the rights, safety, and well-being of the individuals, they very stringently keep monitoring the entire process. They keep balancing between the risks and the benefits of conducting the study in human subjects. And only when the benefits are found to be much better than risks is that permission is given by law of the land or by ethics committee to conduct all these experiments into a human subject. While sponsor takes care of the entire scientific conduct, designing of the protocol, conduct of the study, and stringent monitoring, the sponsor also has all the systems in place to ensure that while we are trying to generate new data for their product in line, none of the human being is harmed in a negative way. So there are systems in place. And lastly, the investigator, your doctor who conducts the clinical trial on you, on patient, he has the prime responsibility of ensuring rights, safety, and well-being of any clinical trial participant. Now, what is important to understand, my industry friends would agree, there's a huge emphasis given on the informed consent process by law and by industry as well. The reason being, this is the only one way in which you can inform your patient about what the study is about, how he's going to benefit or going to risk out from the study. But what we really fail to appreciate is that the process of informed consent form or informing a patient begins much before he really walks into our cabin to sign the ICF or discuss the ICF. So when we start talking to a patient about a particular clinical trial, and especially if it is for the first time, the first thing a doctor must explain to the patient is how a clinical trial is very different from the standard of care or the standard treatment which we provide in our OPDs and clinics. Yes, it is definitely different because during a clinical trial, the patient may benefit or may not benefit. During a clinical trial, I as a treating doctor do not have too much of window for adjusting things, because in normal clinical practice, I would totally go as per patient's symptoms, patient's presentation, and my only focused aim is towards the relief of symptoms in the patient. While in a clinical trial, a lot of things have to be taken into account. There are a lot of restrictions on what can be prescribed and what cannot be prescribed. So there may be a situation where I know that I need to give you a certain medication, but I will not be able to give this to you. So I inform them a priori about it. Next, I as an investigator have to discuss out what impact the study participation will have on his day-to-day life, because this is very important. One of the major reasons for loss to follow-up or patient dropping out, especially in the span of summer vacations, is people go out for vacations. And if we are enrolling them into a year-long study, it is very essential that we inform them a priori that participating into this research will have some restrictions on your day-to-day life. The major one being, you have to take the medication whether you like it or not, on the time which has been, in the dosage which has been prescribed. You have to come for the clinic visits with a little window period. And most important, on the days when the visit is scheduled, you cannot really you will not have the flexibility to just go out of the town. You will have to discuss it out with the study doctor and ensure that this does not coincide with your study visits. So these are some important aspects which have to be looked into, which have to be explained to a patient before they participate. And then what are your responsibilities as a clinical trial participant? Indeed and yes, the patient has certain responsibilities. You give them monitoring diaries. What if they do not fill it? What if they just sit on the day of visit and randomly fill some values? They are then definitely not being responsible patients. So the essence of science and research has to be understood by the patient. It is important to explain him that this particular participation comes up with some responsibilities which you have to cater to. And last but not the least, I think a lot of investigators perhaps fail to focus on this very important aspect. Why is the patient wanting to participate? This is very important to discuss this out before he participates in the study. The reason being, you would certainly not like to have patients who would participate for the fun of participating. You have youngsters who would just like to participate and leave halfway. I would rather pass on that benefit of participating to a much needy patient. So it is very essential to understand why are you participating, whether you want to yourself to be benefited, you want to benefit the mankind, what is the reason behind which he is participating. So having said all this, what are the rights? What are the rights of a participant when he, what does he need to know? What does a patient need to know about his rights as a clinical trial or a clinical research participant? He has the right to agree or disagree to a certain thing in the clinical trial. And first and foremost, he has the right to disagree, to initiate a discussion. He may just not want to listen about participating or about a study which is going on, and you should not force that patient. The right to be informed about risk and benefits, yes, because if you inform him only about the benefits and then didn't tell him the risk, then you're not doing the right job as an investigator. Right to choose to participate or not. Right to exit the study at any stage. So what is very important is, if any of your patient just disagrees to participate after listening to everything, or just decides to walk out of the study one fine day without giving you any reason, you cannot deny next further follow-up visit, or you cannot change your behavior to that patient. You still have to take care of this patient, you still have to be compassionate to this patient, and you still have to take him under your medical care. Rights to demand reimbursement, compensation, cost of medical care. He has been taking a day off from work. He has been, losing on his daily wages. So obviously he has all the rights to come and ask us whether I'm going to be paid for this particular visit. Okay. Your patient has the right to ask, complain, or reject anything, anytime. Yes, he signed an informed consent, but today is the third visit of the patient, and there already has been a blood withdrawal in the morning. He just rejects. I don't want to give any more blood, and there's nothing you can do, and you cannot force this patient. So this is what has to be understood by everybody working, all healthcare people working in this particular study. And what is most important for a patient to understand, that his participation in research is voluntary, which means no one can force him to take part, no one can force him to not withdraw if he wants to, and no one can force him to complete the study. This is completely dependent on that person's choice, that person's commitment, and that person's attitude towards research participation. Now, what are the things the common man needs to know before he really thinks of participating in clinical research? So these are a few pointers. So while we are educating people, while we are campaigning, I think these are the things which we should imbibe into their mind, that if you want to participate in a particular study, these are the questions you should certainly get an answer to. Why is the study being done? What are the risks and benefits? What will be the procedure during each visit? What are the responsibilities of my doctor or the investigator? What are my responsibilities in the study? Who can review my reports? And what if I get pregnant for the female patients? Will I have an health insurance during the study, and what is not covered in the health insurance? Very important for them to understand, because by and large the patients come with a perception that once I participate, everything is covered. And that doesn't turn out to be the case at the time of SAs and As, and we face tough time, swaying between the sponsor and the patient and trying to each of them make them understand each other's point. Whom to contact in emergency? Will I be paid for my medical expenses? What will happen to my samples? Whom can I contact for any concerns or complaint? Very important, because they should know where they can go. Can they go and complain to the doctor who's treating? Many a times they are afraid to. So they need to know what is an ethics committee, where can they go and really voice their opinion about their concern. And most importantly, what we should not forget is we as doctors, we really don't need to have Schedule Y in place or ICH-GCP in place to rate our patients' safety beyond everything. Because when we complete our medical school, when we become doctors, we take the Hippocrates Oath, which binds us that we cannot harm anybody. We cannot harm a human subject. So we are bound, this is our duty, we are bound to ensure their rights and safety. And that is something which industry, law, and patients need to understand and have faith in the treating investigator. And last but not the least, what is important for overall for a common man or a patient to understand, that whether it's any stakeholder in this entire process, whether it's sponsor, whether it's regulators, whether it is investigators, everybody has a primary aim of safeguarding the rights, safety, and well-being of you, the patient. And there are regulations, there is ethics committee, there are study sponsors, and there are investigators who join hands and who work really hard to ensure that a patient is never harmed beyond a certain expected limit of risk when a clinical experiment is being conducted. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation. And before we stop, I would like to take this pledge that from today onwards, I would certainly make every attempt in my own little way to make the common man in India aware about clinical trials. And that's my pledge for the International Clinical Trials Day. And I request all the attendees, all my friends from industry, academia, and medical institutions that do the effort, join this, take this pledge today, and join this drive in making India aware about clinical trials and clinical research. So with this, Thank you very much for your patient listening, and I would now be ready to take up any questions if you have. So we have an interesting question from Sridhar Banga. How did you get the information about 10%? Is it the data from India? No, this is not the data from India, Mr. Banga. This is available. This data is available as reports from various websites. I have already quoted the reference over there. So I'll just let you know the exact reference. So it's the Center for the Study of Drug Development Reports, and I shall be happy to share the details with you on email. I thought financial, so I think the question means that some financial remuneration to the patient is unethical. No, it is not. I would request Ramesh, who has asked this question, to kindly go through the ICMR guidelines for bioethical research. There is a lot being discussed today at different ethical forums that reimbursement to research participants for the time and for the loss of daily wages is not at all ethical. In fact, this is a prevalent practice overseas. I've seen that myself. And all these guidelines, at least the ICMR guidelines, is very clear about, and our ethics committee and a lot of ethics committees these days are being very vocal about it, that yes, research participants, there has to be a certain fixed amount. You cannot range between a housewife and a CEO of a company. So with your wisdom, you have to come across, based on the minimum wages law or something, you have to come across a certain amount per visit, which should definitely be paid to every research participant. We do it here, approved by our ethics committee. In fact, queried by our ethics committee. There was a long discussion, and we do practice it, and I know a lot of centers who have to practice this. Next question is from Tarun. Why 95% of media reports are negative about clinical research? Well, I'm not the right person to really comment on this, but it is my personal opinion that unfortunately only those things which are bad gets reported to them. I have hardly come across any doctors or any, for that matter, industry partners who have otherwise really made efforts to include the positive things about clinical trial in media in a big way, in a way that it can reach common masses. So only the bad thing which becomes a scoop gets reported. That is my opinion. I think media people will be in a better position to answer that. Is there a situation when physicians himself have participated in clinical trial? Question by Rakesh. Well, not that I know, but if I were given a chance, and if the risk was minimalistic, I would definitely take part. I believe my practice and want for money by investigators is bringing bad name. This is again a question by Tarun. Tarun, well, the only, I would not like to defend this because I strongly don't believe in it. I work with a forum of around 250 investigators all across India. We have really gone through a bad patch in the last 2 years where a lot was being done to the extent that a penal law will be in place for doctors who falter in clinical trials. The only comment I would like to make on it is for a doctor to earn the amount which is being offered by participating in clinical trial. It just takes scaling up your practice a bit. It doesn't really take much. So I think by and large, most of the investigators, of course, financials come into picture, but the major reason why everybody wants to participate is their bit of contribution to generating new medical knowledge which will benefit the patients. This is a question from Deepmala. This is regarding the offered treatment being lower than standard of care. Doesn't the rule state that standard of care is minimum care needed in clinical trial? Won't the ethics committee reject any such trial project when the potential results is less than the standard of care? That's an extremely good question, Deepmala. I'm glad you asked that. Well, many a times, I can give you an example of, say, asthma studies. Currently, the guidelines have now included tiotropium, which was till date the molecule which was used primarily to treat COPD, to be included in treating asthma patients, the severe category asthma patients. Now, when you have to conduct a clinical trial, you have to have certain arms. So definitely, when you want to show that tiotropium is having an effect, it is important, and many times it is the requirement by the regulation that a placebo arm be included. Now, in this case, a patient who gets placebo is definitely getting a lower standard than what is definitely being available. Then there are many studies wherein you want to show that the existing combination, these are typically the phase 4 or the phase 3B studies, where you want to show that a certain combination is equivalent to what is available. And in those cases, many times we come across protocol wherein the one arm of the treatment at least is not offering the best standard of care and is inferior. And ethics committee has to review any project with science in background, science in mind, and I think they evaluate the risk and benefit and then they give permission. So we have conducted many such studies. Is a new drug not given after the trial, even if the clinical trial has death as a clinical endpoint? How ethical? Given after the clinical trial. I didn't get this question. Is a new drug not given after the trial, even if clinical trial has death as a clinical endpoint? How ethical? Well, I understand, from my understanding of this question, I guess what you wish to ask is if the clinical endpoint is death in a study, whether it is fair or ethical to give these medications to the patient when you know that they're going to die in a clinical trial. Well, in those cases, I think these studies are taken up only when the disease progression is such that the patient is definitely going to, chronic diseases where the patient is certainly going to land up into death due to either the disease itself or due to combinations. And as I have maintained since beginning, clinical trials or the science or the design has to be evaluated with a big scanner that what are the benefits to mankind versus the risk of participation. And I think in certain cases, yes, we ourselves have done studies where death has been the endpoint, and it has passed the EC after a lot of discussion, where science took, point over the risks. What is the procedure to get clinical trial approved? How much time does it take? In India, so the amount of time a sponsor spends in developing a new molecule to getting it marketed, it ranges anytime between 10 to 15 years. But as far as Indian authorities are concerned, I'm not the right person, but from what I know from my little knowledge, now DCGI has put up a turnaround time in 6 months, 6 to 8 months is the time which they take to respond to their applications made by pharma company. Do you think it would help recruitment if moved to towns and rural places? What do you think are the challenges? Move to towns and the rural places. Participation into research in rural places. We have been conducting a lot of medical research, academic medical researches in a lot of rural villages. These, I would rather say that is good because these people are extremely enthusiastic. They want to know what is being done. So the experience with the rural population as far as research is concerned is much better than what we have with the urban population, because the urban populations has more questions, but they don't have the intent to participate. While the rural people are much more open. As far as clinical trials is concerned, you can't really have clinical trials done in a particular community. You really have to cover a large, vast community. And that's the reason it's pretty challenging. Approachability is an issue, and it gets pretty challenging to go in the rural sectors to work on this particular area. How do you define vulnerable population? Well, vulnerable population is something, it's very simple actually, that the population is dependent on me who is deciding to give a treatment. So if I have, say, this all idea originated with the prisoners of war being, really misused for conducting clinical trials in the 18th century, 17th century. Vulnerable population are those who are not in a position to take their own decisions. Children, pregnant ladies, prisoners, then staff working under you. So if today I have to recruit into a clinical trial and I say my junior, I ask my secretary that, okay, now you participate in the clinical trial. She will not be in a position to deny for the fear of loss of her job. So in this case, she again becomes a vulnerable population. So that is what a vulnerable population means. Faiza Soniwala, when we are talking about common masses to be aware about clinical research paradigm, we also sense a gap amongst doctors in about knowledge of clinical research guidelines and laws. Do you think if media curriculum need to be inclusive of clinical research knowledge? Yes, right from the medical academics, absolutely. In our own way, we are doing our own bit, talking to the medical colleges, because the medical curriculum is vast. There is so much to do in such a little time. Therefore, somewhere this gap is definitely there, and now that we have realized the need, there has to be a multi-pronged approach. So, efforts at the level of medical education, efforts at the level of practicing doctors, and efforts at the level of those who are already into conducting research. How can we enhance their knowledge and how can we ensure more patient engagement? Sudeep has asked this question. Is the CRO is subject to audit? If yes, who will do the audit? A CRO is definitely, the clinical research organizations or the sponsors, they have a terrific, inbuilt mechanism of quality assurance and quality monitoring. They have their own internal audits. They spend hugely on appointing quality assurance teams which take care of all these internal audits. And CROs can anytime be inspected by the regulatory authorities without notice. So it is not essential that every time they are informed. Many a times FDA has gone ahead and really done inspections, and we have seen the results being out in the public media, and that really helps everybody. An inspection or an audit always helps everybody to better on the existing systems and are much needed. What is the difference between PMS and phase 4? Post-marketing surveillance is done for the products. Again, I'm not perhaps not the right person to answer this, but from my knowledge, post-marketing surveillance are the studies which are done on the products which are already there into the market for a long time, and for which you want to, for example, you want to combine two existing products, or you want to collect some more data, some more efficacy data on existing product. Whereas phase 4 study starts right from the time marketing permission is obtained. So you have a pharmacovigilance program in place, because studies typically are done for 2 years, 1 year's maximum. What happens when, especially in case of new drugs, the new chemical entities, the new drugs which has come into market, absolutely newly researched and fresh into the market. What happens to a patient when he consumes this drug for say 5 years? Nobody knows the answer. Investigator to the patient is very, very different in the Western countries, and the basic reason being a well-informed patient over there and a well-informed doctor. Here, if I have missed to sign, creates a panic wave if I have forgot to really sign one place in the informed consent. So what? The patient has signed the entire consent form, he's gone through the entire consent form. There are ways to, address these typographical errors, these oversights. But the overall attitude towards research over there is very relaxed. The patient has no anxiety, is well informed, and that is what is really lacking in India. They choose which studies to participate in. That we haven't yet matured to that stage. How is standard of care defined in the Indian laws? Well, law doesn't define standard of care. Standard of care is defined by the guidelines, the world guidelines which guide that particular disease. For each and every disease, in fact, for each and every ailment in a particular system, say respiratory. We have world guidelines on asthma, guidelines on COPD, guidelines on IPF, guidelines on managing allergic rhinitis. So all the world experts and the bodies on the international bodies come together and form these guidelines, which are taken as the standard of care. Do you think rural population will be able to understand risk versus benefits and their rights with clinical trials considering low literacy? Absolutely. Absolutely. I think rural population is much more energetic, much more hungry for information than our urban population today. And that comes merely, that's my statement, that comes merely from 10 years of experience into working with rural population for a lot of research intervention projects. And of course, a local language is a barrier. The person who is taking consent, the person who is making them understand what is going to happen has to know the local vernacular language, because unless you know that, you cannot effectively communicate with these people. So yes, it is possible. What are your views on the new compensation formula? Do you think the new formula will encourage more participation? This is again, I'm not the right representative to be able to comment, but from a doctor's point of view, from an investigator's point of view, we have seen so many cases of being filed for compensation. So when this law was made, when this was open for discussion, there was a huge reaction from investigators, fraternity, ethics committees, and industry that what will happen, whether this will be looked upon as an inducement. But having worked with this formula for the last 1 or 2 years, this really serves as a saving grace, because this is very well defined. There is definitely a certain amount, because earlier it used to be a challenge to tell the patients that something has happened to the patient and how much should the sponsor pay. Now we have a definitive formula, and this is definitely extremely useful. And it doesn't encourage more participation, because it all depends on the informed consent process, on the doctor, on how you have explained the clause of compensation to the patient. You don't get compensated for participating in a study. You get compensated in case an injury is caused. And there is a huge difference between these two things which need to be explained to the patient. Rahul, with a lot of protocols attempting to prove non-inferiority, the sample size has to be increased. Do you think this adds to the perception that patients are recruited as guinea pigs? No, I think because this is a very, very technical thing to do, which definitely occurs at the level of industry, at the level of sponsor, EC, regulations, and the doctors. The negative perception or the guinea pig perception which is there in common people is more because of the negative publicity which clinical trial and the industry per se has gained, especially because of the PIL filed and the case going on, and a lot of voices active against clinical trials. I think what is very important, we have so many testimonials from the patients, verbal testimonials, verbatims, that they never knew participating in research could be this wonderful. So unless you have gone into it, you have experienced it, you will not be able to understand it. So I think this is more of a problem of the uneducated lot, uneducated with respect to clinical trial. How liable is the investigator when any mishap or any serious adverse event happens during the course of a clinical trial? I think the only person liable or held responsible for anything going wrong with the patient, by the patient, is the doctor. Now, this is a tricky situation because we have already informed the patient of what can happen. Not that it happens in every patient. Probably that patient was an unfortunate one, wherein every patient is a different human being. Every patient reacts different to any medication, be it a clinical trial medication or be it a normal medication. So we don't know a priori before enrolling a patient, but yes, while we are monitoring the patient through the course of the study, doctors have to really make wise decision, looking at the counts, looking at the reports, whether this patient could line up into a problem, and a medical judgment whether he needs to be withdrawn. The Indian government is thinking of fixing the price of medicines. Do you see this will impact pharma industry revenue benefits? I think this question is a bit out of scope of today's discussion, and I would like to restrict my comments. So if there are no more questions, I would like to say a big thanks to the organizers and thanks to all the participants for taking time out and attend today's webinar. And this was indeed a learning experience for me as well, talking to the patients, understanding their concerns. Thank you very much.